Hello fellow preppers. Today we're going to be making medicinal herbal infused oils. I'm using some plantain I gathered because I need to make plantain salve. So that's going to be my example, but in my experience and wisdom from other herbalists or homesteaders and things that I've researched, this process should work for whatever type of root, plant, weed, or herb that you are going to be making an herbal infusion with. This method is not usually recommended for culinary purposes simply because this is made to be stored long term and is going to be simmered longer and is going to have more fresh natural matter in it instead of something that's been dried. I know people who go ahead and use this for seasonings and sauces for just flavor or for a medicinal boost, but some folks say that it's really not the best way to do it, that you could possibly infuse bacteria into the process, especially when it's stored long term. So that's something you would just need to do a little bit of research on yourself and decide which way that you want to use it. I'm focusing on items for my apothecary, doing some prepping in that mode now before we get to canning season and harvesting and all the other busy things that happen on a survival homestead during the late summer and early fall. Now when you're making an herbal infusion, you want to work with your clean and dried natural matter and use sterile canning jars just as if you were canning food. I use this baby bottle brush to clean down in mine. Now even though this is not going to be for medicinal purposes, for edible purposes necessarily, you still want to be working with a sterile jar, and you still want to be mindful of the potential of mold being formed. You do not want any mold or bacteria, and that happens mostly, in my experience, from using green matter that's not in good quality, that hasn't been washed, and has not been strained well enough. I know some folks worry about using the seal on a mason jar, especially if they have something very acidic. Some people use apple cider vinegar instead of carrier oils, or certain recipes for the medicine they're making call for apple cider vinegar to be mixed in with this herbal infusion oil that's your base. I can with distilled white vinegar, and like probably everybody on the planet does, and we've not ever had any problem with any rust or corrosion happening from the vinegar touching near the lid. One of the reasons you leave a bit of headspace, but jars get moved around and shaken, so the underneath of the lid is going to get exposed to some amount of vinegar. If you're concerned about that, any problems with vinegar, corrosion, or potential rust, you can always buy the plastic multi-use ring and lid combos instead of the reusable ring and the one-time use lid. Or you can use some paraffin wax at the top of the herbal infusion if you're going to store it and not turn it into salve or a different type of once it's made, which is what I'm going to be doing with this batch. Depends how big the batch is. I may be saving some, I may be using it all. You could also use some wax paper around the seal, but anytime you use anything like that, around the seal to put a barrier there, you're infusing the material that's in your barrier, and which could also create a problem with mold, or just simply introducing material into your recipe for medicinal purposes that you might not want. Now what I'm doing now, some people chop, some people puree, actually use their blender or food processor. I've not ever found that I really need to do that. To rip these up, you can lay them and chop them. It'll depend. If you're doing a root, you'll definitely need to be doing some chopping, and certain types of plant parts that you might. But for the plantain and any of the flower or weed that I've used, I just tear them apart in small bits. That makes the simmering process go more quickly and lets the oil infuse around everything. Something doesn't get doubled up like this leaf does here. Now this one has a decent amount of bad spots on it. Now what you can do if you're short on supplies, and I'm really not in the plantain, so I'm probably just going to pitch this one, but you can pull around it and tear off the good, keep it, and pitch the bad, just like you would with potatoes. But you want small bits, and you want to be able to pull every little last bit of the sap or nutrients, or depends on what material that you're using. But the jars, this one's not quite halfway full yet. You want to lightly pack it a little bit, give it a couple shakes, but just really not advised to put a whole leaf in there. Maybe if you're doing the solar infusion, it might be okay, but it's still going to slow down the process. And you can use mixed parts of the plant, whether it's a flower that's being grown medicinally in your apothecary patch, like echinacea or calendula, or a wild weed or wild flower that you've picked. Most recipes say that you can use all parts of it in infused oil. Now, it depends on what plant you're using. If it's something that has medicinal value in all parts. Some things only have a medicinal value in some parts, so you don't want to waste the space that's going to be used in your jar. You want to pull out only good things and not wasteful things. Or there could be some parts of a plant during certain times of the year where pieces of it are something you absolutely cannot use or not use ever. So for the plantain, I can use every part of the plant. So I'm not needing to separate away any stems, any seeds, any flowers, any root pieces, because these are all usable. So that will depend on what you're using, or even if the whole plant's usable, the recipe that you're called for in your salve or your tincture or your tea might only want certain parts of a plant. So pay attention to the directions on there. Just because the whole plant might be safe to use, that does not mean that the whole plant is wanted in your recipe. You're going to do a lot of stockpiling of infused oils, like I like to do, when you're doing something that the whole plant is typically used for. That makes it easy to make a bunch of them and not worry about what parts are in them. You know, we make a lot of plantain salve, and with plantain, that's really the only recipe I'm using it for. Anything else, we would just grab a piece from the wild and munch on it and slap it on a bug bite or even a snake wound. But I won't be using plantain for anything but this one recipe where I know I can use all the pieces. And if you're going to be using the plantain, anything else, echinacea, say you're using something that one thing you're likely to make is going to call for everything. One might call for just this part, or it might call for only the young leaves and not the older leaves. There's variations like that in a lot of herbal survival medicine recipes. Then all you need to do is put a label on your jars, just like you would anything else that you're canning from your vegetable garden, so you know exactly what that one contains. So these are now pretty well half to 3/4 the way full, lightly packed. You can move them around a bit and they shake, but there's not a lot of ample airspace in there. You want to have enough of your natural matter that you're going to get the nutrient boost, the medicinal boost that you want out of it, but not so much that the oil can infiltrate it all and do its business. I'm going to put just a few more in here. I like to err on the side of caution and add just a little bit more than what I need. Now, if you're using the whole plant and you have something where it's a thick stem or a very thick root, you might be able to get by with just doing this pulling to separate to speed it up like I am. And on part of it, and then part of it you may need to chop it. Like, see, here's the root of the plantain. It's just a bit sinewy, not very small. The roots have a lot of medicinal value in them and high nutrients. So the couple I pulled up with the roots, I'm splitting the roots up amongst all my other jars. That's something you can think about too. If certain parts of the plant are more beneficial than others, look over what you foraged or you purchased and then decide how to split it up so maybe you can make everything equally potent, which will make a difference in your recipes. If you might have one that works a lot better than the other, it could be the way you divvied up the ingredients. So now these are full enough of the natural matter. I'm going to put them in my pseudo double boiler here, an old cast iron pot. Yes, it's old, it needs re-seasoned. You can't really roll in cast iron, just need some elbow grease to get it ready. But the fact that it's rusty on the outside is not going to hurt anything, because all my ingredients are in the jar. About 2 to 4 inches of water in there so that your glass doesn't break, because we are using it as a double boiler. I am pouring in olive oil. I don't think I'm going to have enough olive oil right here handy to do 3 jars. So I'll pull this one out for a minute, because you want the oil to very well cover your natural matter. Ideally, as close to the top of the jar as you can get it. And you can combine carrier oils. Some recipes might call for one type of carrier oil specifically, or to say your favorite carrier oil. I tend to use almond, olive, coconut, sunflower oil. Regular vegetable oil isn't that good, but it can work in a pinch. There's apricot oil. There's all different kinds of oil that you can use. You may already have your favorite. And you can combine them. Like if I wanted to, here we go. I have some coconut oil handy. And I'm a little shy on my olive oil on this one. So I will go ahead and pour a little bit of coconut oil in. You pull it up. Make sure it is above, your oil is at least above. That's a little solid, but coconut oil liquefies very quickly. So here in a second, that'll turn to all liquid. But make sure that your liquid, your oil that you've chosen to use is at least above your natural matter, preferably up close to the rim. That could use a smidge more. So here in just a minute, I'll dig out some more oil and I'll pour it in. Now this is the jar my last olive oil came in. Nice glass jar. And if you can use this if you want to. I'd say this would be more for short-term use to store things in if you don't want to dig out your mason jars and use up lids for something. You're going to be making salve all week or something, and you don't want to waste all the lids to your mason jars. You can use a glass jar like this. The lid fits firmly enough, maybe a mayonnaise jar, something like that. It's great for shorter term storage, a little bit more difficult to clean inside, but it can be done. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my heat on. And I'm going to let this simmer for 2 full hours. I find if I let it simmer for 2 instead of the sometimes recommended 1, it's much more potent infused oil. And I'm going to turn it down very low, about as low as the stove will go. If you're going to only simmer it for the half hour to an hour, I would set it on maybe 2 to 3, and depending if yours has numbers or a dial. That is as low as my stove will go, and I'm going to let it simmer for 2 hours. If I was only going to do it for half hour to an hour, I'd probably move it 1 pinky finger's width up. That gives you a good ballpark average of alternating the heat. The longer it's simmered, the more potent your compounds will be, and the lower you need the heat to be. You never ever want to let it come to a boil. And when it's done simmering, and then it will look something like this. This is what my solar infused oil looks like. It's not quite ready yet. But see how the liquid is a lot darker? This is also plantain in here, plantain and jewelweed. I give it a shake every day. So this is not ready. I'm trying out different varieties. Some things, types of recipes, I have better luck if I do it solar. Some just let it shake and settle for 6 to 8 weeks. So it depends on what method you want to do with something. And you like to try different ones. These ones, I think, store a bit longer shelf life if you do the kind that are solar, or you just give it the shake every couple of days for 4 to 6 weeks or 6 to 8, depending on what your particular recipe might be asking for. The water ends up a little bit murky like that before it's strained. It'll look like it's been tinged with something yellow. But when this gets done, I will strain out the mixture, and I will actually be keeping my green matter in here because there's nothing in it that's not natural. And I'm going to go ahead and put all that in a pot and throw in some sheep's wool that I've cleaned and use it as a natural dye on the sheep's wool. So I'm using my materials twice, not going to cost me a dime. But I will show you what it looks like when we strain it and how to strain it, and then you can just either get ready to use it immediately or you can store it. These are glass bottles, and I would not recommend using them at all, even if you let it cool to room temperature first. They're just not as good for storage as something glass. So check out yard sales, pick you up some cheap glass jars or the Goodwill if you don't have, if you don't have canning jars to use, or you don't want to waste your lids and rings. And you can help build up your natural survival method apothecary by searching in your yard and elsewhere for natural materials that can help heal you. You can buy them in powdered form from different suppliers. You don't have to grow your own or go foraging for them. Learn how to identify the things that grow around you that you can eat and can be used to heal you would be definitely a very good part of your overall survival plan.